Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Gong, the podcast hosting conversations about the earliest stages of startup sales and all the fun stories that come from companies with little cash, no precedence, and lots of guts. My name is Adriel, and I've led sales at multiple companies, sometimes as CEO, other times as head of sales, and always with a love for the job and a fondness for fun stories. Currently, I lead sales at self-driving delivery car company UDelv. I love startup history, scrappy sales and stories, and I'm excited to learn them and share them with you. Our guest today is Derek Rahn. Derek has spent his entire career in sales, doing all the jobs from an intro-level SDR to what he is currently, the VP of Sales at LeadGenius, a lead generation startup with $19 million in funding. Derek has led some massive deals, including getting LeadGenius, at the time a little nothing startup like many of ours, into Google. He thinks a lot about what it takes to train young SDRs, how to move a company's sales strategy upmarket into larger deals, and a lot, because of the relevancy of what his company does, what artificial intelligence means for the future of sales. My favorite part of our conversation is our discussion about how startups need to prepare themselves for selling larger clients. It's not just bringing your current process into larger companies and emailing the C-suite O's or whatever at Fortune 500s and repeating it all. Personally, I'm obsessed with the value of selling to small companies and getting everything possible out of the fast sales cycle and fast feedback loops before moving to larger clients. And Derek agrees. Derek has been through that multiple times and knows that crossing that chasm from small client to large, that gap takes many startup lives. And we talk a lot about how to survive that crossing, how to do it thoughtfully, and as Derek said, how to take advantage of the fact that you only get one chance to bring your company up market. I learned a lot from Derek, and I actually took quite a few notes, including this great gem of a quote, that startups selling to startups is like drunk people selling each other beer at a bar. Eventually, everybody gets too drunk and goes home. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Derek Rahn. Well, Derek, welcome to The Gong.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is going to be a blast. I think we're going to have a lot of fun if our little pre-banter here is any sign of what is to come. I wanted to start this conversation, and we'll take it all over what it means to be a sales leader and how sales is evolving with what AI can do in the field, and we'll take it everywhere. But I thought perhaps a good place to start would be with the holy grail of what a salesperson believes in, their LinkedIn description. In your LinkedIn description, you say that you are a sales chameleon. So I'd love to understand and start there with what is a sales chameleon?
Yeah, it's funny, like I've talked about my my life and my career as like a storyteller and as as a listener and what I was thinking when I was rewriting my LinkedIn when I became a VP of sales, I was like thinking about what are like my characteristics as a person that make me effective in my job. And I think that like because I come from a very diverse background, having lived in several different areas of the country and met a lot of different type of people, one of the things that my friends have reflected on is that I have a really diverse friend group, like really diverse, and I think that also kind of speaks to the type of sales that I've done. So I've done really big sales to the federal government, multi-million dollar common access card and multi-factor authentication sales to the Department of Defense. And I've sold small businesses, literally like micro small businesses, mom and pops trying to buy websites. So, I think that sales, again, is really all about how you relate subject matter to an audience and how you, solve their problems. But because I have such a wide breadth of kind of experience in selling things, I consider myself to be a sales chameleon.
What is that? How do you recommend people cultivate a skill like that?
Oh man, it's tough because I feel like so much of this is just like putting yourself in the person's shoes that you're across the table from, and trying to actually understand their world. And so like I always start with what my commonalities are. And I was talking with this company that sells um, HIPAA and PCI software, and how I related to that um, was that my dad was a chiropractor and my mom ran his front office, and those are the people that they sell to. So I understand that persona. I understand that buyer persona. So whether it's like finding personal experience where it's like, oh yeah, I know someone who's in that space. And oftentimes I'll even sit down before I have a conversation with the customer with someone who's in an adjacent field or that knows a little bit about a space, and to say, hey, tell me a little bit about this industry. Tell me about, kind of what's happening, what's going on. What are the sensitive areas? What's some terminology I can use so that I look like I know what I'm talking about, right? Like, and so I think that, that people think about that as research a lot of times, or pre-call planning. Um, I just think about it like kind of getting to know your surroundings. And then the second part of that is too, like, good salespeople will match kind of the tonality of the person that they're on, and know when to inflect and know when to be more passive. And a lot of that is like reading the audience and knowing like, hey, I'm talking with someone's very soft spoken right now, so I need to lower and dampen my voice. Or it's like I'm talking to a sales guy, I need to be more high energy, I need to talk faster, I need to match their tone and their rate of speech. So that's what I, when I think about Sales Chameleon and think about like kind of getting in that mindset. For me, it comes very naturally, but when I've tried to teach reps about that, it's like, well, do you know anything about the person you're selling to? And they go, no, I've got no idea. It's like, well, you need to learn something about that person. You need to
Yeah,
learn
one
something about that
place.
industry.
One place where this actually right away, as you were speaking, kind of this light bulb lit up is when you're learning a new language.
Immersion.
Immersion, exactly. So
Yeah.
getting yourself into that world, and you understand that world a lot faster. But also importantly to sales and to your ability to navigate a new country, that culture, that kind of group of people begins to respect and understand you more. There's this guy named Benny the Polyglot. He's this Irish guy who speaks like over 20 languages, and his whole thing is this framework for learning new languages. And I remember as I was learning Spanish through his program, he talked about how there's these little tiny little things that you can do to make it seem like you're really in the know, to give yourself like a 50% immersion advantage over somebody else. If you just roll your R's, or if you just learn this one little catchphrase of the area that you're going to, it makes it seem like you're just more like them than you really and truly are. And then as you make your way up the stepping stones of getting to know that language or that culture, you can work off of those low footholds and get stronger. And it seems to me to be the same thing in sales. If you're going for a new industry, and you're talking to somebody who sells HIPAA certification software, and that's not something you've ever done, well, if you can just learn the lingo a little bit, if you just learn one reference customer, or that the CEO of that company gave a talk and you just happen to mention that, well, all of a sudden somebody gets really, really excited, and they do most of the talking for you after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, breaking down that barrier, breaking down that wall, and being seen as part of their peer group or cohort, or like someone that they can relate to, is really, really critical. I mean, it's like the best and most advanced form of rapport building. Like there's always like the cheesy like intro parts of conversations where it's like, oh, you're in Boston, it's cold, and like there's always that goes back and forth. But if you can actually start a conversation with, hey, like, what do you think about the news about your industry? And or like, I heard this is going on, can you tell me more? And you actually like use that to actually make them, create their own like feeling of confidence and subject matter expertise. They'll also start to break down the barriers and start to actually let you into their house a little bit to uncover that pain that's really going to make a pitch so much more effective.
So a lot of people use the phrase "people buy from people," which is a wonderful phrase, but it's true. Of course, it's true. But also would love your thoughts about, you made your way up. You've been doing this for about 15 years and now you're vice president. So a lot of your role as a salesperson is not so much, I imagine, in the sales as it is in the training. How do you approach training young salespeople to be that kind of individual where it is the kind of person that people want to buy from? Or even you gave some specific examples. Your inflection matters, your tone of voice matters, that adaptability to the kind of conversation you're having matters. How do you go about teaching younger salespeople or just people doing this for the first time, people working on this skill, how to do that? You said it's innate to you, but it's certainly not innate to everybody or all the millions of people who are doing sales in America.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? I think that, well, first of all, I would say people buy from people that they like, right?
It's an important
So,
qualifier.
so I'll add that little last caveat. People buy from people that they like, right? And I think that when I start to talk to either new salespeople or salespeople, I've got a couple of older gentlemen on my team and an older lady who they are senior to me by 10, 20 years, right? um, and so whenever I kind of bring a salesperson on or interview a salesperson, I'm also trying to get an understanding of kind of their worldview and understanding a little bit more about how they communicate and also how they receive information, because training is one of those things that is challenging. I mean, you can give two of the same BDRs the same exact content, the same IQ, right? On paper, they could be the same type of student, and you could deliver the same content in the same exact way, and their absorption of that content or ability to actually replicate it and put it to use can be completely different. And so I think that it's always important to do some level of assessment whenever you're thinking about a training program and thinking about a training curriculum. And one of the things that we try to do is assess where people are to begin with. And because in our world, we're in the data space, they have to know something about the data space. They also have to know about sales and marketing because those are our buyers. They also have to know about ops people and ops teams and how they work with Salesforce. And then they have to know about the individual industries that we sell into, because again, the nomenclature, the diction, the pain inside of these different industries are very different. Selling data to an e-commerce company or to a company that's targeting e-commerce is very, very different than selling to someone who's selling manufacturing or selling health to health services. So, we try to verticalize our teams so that you can actually limit what they actually have to learn, because there's already having to learn the data space, having to learn marketing, having to learn sales ops, and then you throw in a bunch of industries on top of it. It's too much.
That's really interesting. Tell me a little bit more about that. Specifically, sometimes it seems like in a startup, in a small company, I mean, resources are very, very valuable, of course, because they're scarce. And sometimes it seems like those scarce resources might be put into the wrong field, or deciding where to put them is difficult. Do you go to something, do you want to put them into a certain industry? Do you want to put your engineering resources to target having larger install bases or greater stickiness or more top of funnel, more bottom of funnel, whatever it is? How do you think about, you talked about verticalizing your salespeople, how do you think about further ways that folks in startup companies can focus their resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to follow the almighty dollar in a large respect. When I joined LeadGenius, we really were selling to startups, and about 80% of our revenue came from other startups, uh, which is pretty problematic, to say the least. I'll tell you, um, one of our VCs told me, as we were grabbing drinks after a board meeting one time, he's like, we got to move away from selling to startups. Startups selling to startups is like a bunch of drunks selling beer to each other at a bar. uh, eventually the lights are going to come on, and everyone's going to be broke and drunk, and everyone's got to go home to their significant others. And that's usually a pretty come to Jesus moment when that happens. So, for us, it was when I came in, I had a focus on taking us up market. It was something that the founders had identified as a strategic need. And because, in a lot of cases, it takes the same resources to fulfill a small customer as it does to fulfill a large customer. It's also about how do I make the best sense and make the best use of my resources? Because if I need a customer success manager on every account, and I need, project coordinators, or I need other layers beneath that, I'd rather have that revenue be 5x than 1x. Right. And so I think that, you do have to follow the money, and you also have to, hopefully you're behind a founder that has a sense of the marketplace and who they solve for, but you really have to, as early as you can, try to develop those patterns and try to look at what commonalities, what threads tie our consumers together. And the sooner that you're able to do that, it's not even it's persona building, but it's bigger than that, because it's really about what types of organizations should we sell to? And if we look at two different industries, are they different in their buying habits? Their sales cycles look differently? Do their procurement methods look differently? Do we need to have different approaches, different collateral, different sales decks for different parts of the market? And you can look at the close time and things like that, but really you should be looking at the activity that leads to successful sales, and then using that to focus your go-to-market strategy and your outbound. So I think that that's all the way I've kind of thought about it is, the proof's in the pudding, who's willing to put up the dollars. And I've had instincts about stuff that I'm like, oh yeah, this is where it's going to be, and we do the analysis and I'm completely wrong.
You mentioned that beautiful quote. I think that's a title-worthy, LinkedIn shareable. Startups selling to startups is like a bunch of drunks selling beer to each other at a bar. But oftentimes that seems to be the first customer that comes up, and there's lots of examples like that. LeadGenius is obviously one of them. The one I really like is Stripe. Patrick Collison, the CEO of Stripe, went around to all the other companies in Y Combinator, literally took their computers away from them and wrote the line of code to the API into Stripe into their websites, and then gave the computers back. Like, didn't even give a chance to. It wasn't a sales process. He just took people's computers, put Stripe on there, and then made the sale to startups. But eventually, You're right. Probably half of those went out of business. The other half never paid. And you got to move up market, and you got to find those connections. I would love to, as much as you're able to share, hear a specific story of something either you've been through or you've seen about how moving up market works. Many companies start with smaller clients and make their way up. Many companies start in one industry and move horizontally to another industry when they realize that under industry is better. And we've got plenty of our own, or I got plenty of my own, at least in the startups I've worked with. In your experience, would love to hear of an example of moving either up market and growing from smaller deals to larger deals, and how you handle that, or moving horizontally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that moving up market is easier said than done, because you're not only reliant, especially as I'm speaking really from the perspective of a startup in this case, but one of the challenges with the moving up market is is your organization actually equipped and ready to handle an enterprise sales process?
Give me an example. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, can you pass an InfoSec review from Google? Right? You want to sell to Google, but are your systems and your architecture and your product at the point where you actually are not a liability to their security team? Right? Can you make it through a procurement process with these companies? Can you extend terms? Do you have the cash flow to extend net 90 terms that some of these companies are going to expect, and to float cash? These are business maturation questions, right? So I think that like it's one of the funny things is, especially when you're hang out in Silicon Valley and you hang out with, entrepreneurs, it's like, oh yeah, we're ready to start selling enterprise. And it's like, what tells you that? And then they're like, well, what do you mean? Like we have, 150 installed customers and, they love us. And it's like, yeah, great. Like what's the biggest customer you have? And they start talking about, it's like, great, like walk me through that sales process. Like walk me through how you, well, I know their founder. It's like, yeah, their founder, you were able to cut them a sweetheart deal and, it's a love fest. When you start to sell to mid-market enterprise groups, the number of eyes, the amount of scrutiny that goes into a deal is just, the magnification factor is so much higher. And so, I think that whenever founders decide that they're going to, or whenever an organization decides that they're going to go up market, they also have to understand that while that deal might be 5 or 10x what their SMB customer is, the friction, the time, the closing time is going to also mirror that cost benefit. And where I've people get in trouble is they're like, well, we don't understand what's going on. Our normal closing process is, our sales cycle is 3 weeks, and this deal's been out there for 3 months. It's like, yeah, you're selling to enterprise. Like, it's going to take you a month just to get through their infosec process. It's going to take you another month to get through their procurement process, and that's if they even like return your calls. And then that's like, think about what legal's going to do your contracts. Like, do you have legal on your side that can take their red lines and put them into practice or say yes and no? So I think that it's like always really and like it's always something that the companies are like, how do we go up market faster? And it's like going up market when the organization is at that natural organic point where it really makes sense to do it. And you also know that you can fulfill what you're selling, because I'll tell you that you only get one chance at going up market. You really screw someone over by selling them a rose garden and then delivering a bunch of manure, and that word gets around town real quickly. So I'm not trying to scare people away, but I'm just saying I've seen some situations where you get to the point where it's like, we can't even fulfill this deal. What were we thinking? Because their eyes are bigger than their stomach.
Yeah, I think that last one hits home, especially in a startup, and I strongly believe this, but it's the responsibility partially of the founder, but I think more than anybody, it's the responsibility of the head of sales to be that point of trust and that final point of true honesty and candor between the customer and the company. Because oftentimes the founder, once they're done being, if they're not very involved in the sales process, they might be a little bit removed. And just like, oh yeah, sure, sell. Tell them, if we're late, it's okay, it'll totally work out. And obviously the startup wants you to sell, but the company you're dealing with only wants you to sell what you're able to deliver, because they are already discounting what you're telling them by 50%. They already think that you're blowing something up a little bit, or you're puffing out your chest. But when a salesperson at a startup takes this job with the true kind of responsibility that's behind it, guarding the integrity of the startup that's doing the sale and protecting the interests of the customer, balancing that can be very, very difficult, because you're getting pushed from either side to either sell more, sell less, or undercut, or undersell, or oversell, or sell the dream versus sell the reality. And it becomes a very fine line very quickly, and you can sink a little bit below that line if you go too far.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, there's there's always going to be, especially selling to enterprise, there's always going to be some type of technical caveat or some type of, hoop that you're going to have to jump through, right? Whether it's the terms that you're extending them, or whether it's, hey, we want, an API, or we want you to do this inside the product, right? There's always that give and take. And it's funny because, I think founders and people that are sitting there, trying to, get ready for the next board meeting are very eager to say, yeah, tell them whatever they need in order to get it done. And then it's like, but can we execute? Because I'm the person who have just put my name and my reputation on the line for you. Like, are you actually going to support me with the organizational support needed in order to make this happen? And I've been very fortunate to have, companies and founders that don't make me cross that line, but I've seen people just forced in these situations where they're like, sell the deal and we'll worry about it later. And, that's why salespeople get a bad rep. Like, that's why, it's funny when I talk to, when I've recruited some people out of CS to be salespeople, I've recruited people from other disciplines where I see they have some natural sales ability and really active listening skills. And, they're most of the time, their biggest hesitation is like, I don't want to be like a slimy salesperson. It's like, am I slimy? And they're like, no. It's like, then just sell like me. just sell honestly. And if you can't help the customer, walk away from the deal and you'll live to see another day. So I think that a lot of that stereotype and that stigma has disappeared in the sales kind of space. But I mean, I just remember that talking to people that I was trying to recruit out of college at my last job to become salespeople, and they're like, "Why would I waste my degree and go into sales?" It's like, do you even understand what we do? So, it's always a balancing act.
Do you may the answer to this next question maybe no, or maybe it'll just be something you think of in a day or two, which is totally fine, and we can move on if that's the case. But do you have an example that comes to mind of when in your career you as a salesperson have had an ethical decision in front of you, maybe as the leader, actually in the sales position? And ethical doesn't mean you're going to harm somebody by doing one thing or another. But do you remember a time where you have had this sort of challenge of choosing anything that comes to mind? And naming names may not be the right thing here, but any sort of example in which you've had to make a conscious decision to do what you believed is the right thing when you got pushback from others?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those kind of conflicts, if you're in sales long enough, are going to exist. And also because I've worked for a lot of kind of like professional services types of organizations, the conflict there can be more stark and more material because in software it can be binary. It either does or doesn't do this. The feature does or doesn't exist. They're like, this is how frequently we do batches, or there's a certain amount of drawn boundaries to that type of software sale, which is why people are attracted to software sales. In the professional services world, there's a lot of estimates. There's a lot of well, we think it's going to take this long, or we think that this is what the development time is, the professional services behind it is, the implementation is, the feature functionality is, and then you actually get into the sale and you've sold something, even if you had the best of intentions, and it's like, oh crap, the alignment is off, the amount of work that's needed is more or less, right? And it's like, oftentimes organizations are just like, great, like, we'll just take that money, we're just going to put it in our pocket. And they kind of over scope and take that money in return. But I think that when I've had to sell small businesses, when these people are living and providing jobs for other people, you want to try to put as much of that money back in the business as possible. So I've definitely had some situations where I felt like we were overcharging a customer for what we were delivering, and I tried to make the internal case to the company I was working for that giving that money back to the customer or repurposing that money for a marketing spend where that customer then would be more and more successful with us was in our best interest. And again, fortunately, for the most part, I've worked for organizations that think about those people as actual people. And I always, when these ethical dilemmas come up, I always kind of think about this as a formula. It's there's a customer, there's a company, and then there's a consultant, the 3 C's, right? Those are the kind of the 3 aspects of a deal. So you've got the customer, which without a customer, the company doesn't exist. right? So you have to have that customer, you have to sell to that customer, and you have to appreciate their business and retain it. If that company doesn't exist, then the consultant doesn't exist. That rep, the sales rep doesn't exist, right? But anytime that you get too far out of balance in between, oh, like the customer's really getting hosed over here and the rep is doing really well and the company's doing okay, like you should be evaluating, those cases and saying, hey, how do we align, our compensation, our offering, our deliverable, so that you create as much of a win-win-win situation as you can. Because anytime you get those things too far to whack in anyone's favor, you're going to create conflict and you're going to create really unsatisfied parties and a bad business, to be honest with you. Like it's not, if you're too far out of whack in any three of those areas, then it's not a sustainable business model.
That's why, kind of to wrap that part of it up, I am a huge proponent of somebody from the sales team, maybe the salespeople or in a small enough company, the head of sales, switching over to operations for a period of time and vice versa, so that they can really appreciate what it takes to implement the thing that they're selling. So when they say a month and they go and see what it takes and how it actually takes 8 weeks, they begin to appreciate that it's not just, work a little harder, you'll get it done in a month. But to understand the difference, and same thing on the other side. So I'm a huge fan of swapping roles.
Yeah, and that's why I've also liked to I've picked, customer service people out and like recruited them into sales through the course of my career, because they have that fulfillment perspective and they're going to under promise and over deliver, which again, like you can't look at it on an individual transaction basis, because if you just looked at it on an individual transaction basis, the company's going to look at it and say, well, the customer's really, really benefiting here and we're holding the bag. You have to look at it over, a complete lifetime and life cycle of an account, and understand that, like, this is transactions, that account for debits and credits that equal a balance, hopefully, at the end of the day. And customer success people tend to have, especially people that have been in the front lines in fulfillment, talking with angry customers, they tend to make really, really good salespeople, because they know how to kind of draw that line, right? They know how to, like, okay, this is like, I can go just this far without really, really violating ethics or over promising or getting myself in trouble down the line.
Derek, if I'm catching a theme here, I think it's that you have had the courage to stand up to your own companies quite a few times, with your own ideas, and that oftentimes it seems you're playing the role of, I don't know, contrarian thinker or naysayer in a good way, within your own company. If that's right or wrong, please correct me. But the question stands of, as a current VP of sales at a well-growing startup, LeadGenius, how do you think about your role within the company, specifically as it comes to helping the company pick its direction, helping the company know what to say yes to and what to say no to from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that VP of sales role is one, is mentorship and guiding the types of deals that we engage in, to make sure that we're having successful customer engagements and that we're growing organically. And when you delight a customer and exceed their expectations, there's no better way to grow your business than to to do that organically. And because also the rate that people change jobs now is so frequent. I mean, I've sold some of my customers 3 or 4 times over within just my time at LeadGenius, because they get to success at one company, and then it's time for the next opportunity, it's time for the next challenge, and then they take us with them. So I think that, like, being a conduit to the marketplace to say, hey, like, these are the type of deals that we should be selling, this is how we should go up market, this is how that strategy should unravel, and also making sure that to the rest of the business that you're communicating and understanding where the pushbacks are, or where the roadmap is needs to go, and how we get there as an organization, and not just try to grab as much cash as quickly as possible, but to actually sell deals that that you're going to be able to fulfill, that also lead to internal learnings and a better overall level of customer success, but also things like better margins because you just understand what you're doing more, and you have more muscle memory because you're actually being strategic about the types of businesses that you're going out and selling to. So I think that that conduit to the marketplace and actually the voice of the customer is a really, really critical one, and not just, what they complain about, but what they actually want, what would make them double their spend, and actually just asking the customer that.
What LeadGenius does is a lot of the work has to do with the AI involved in the sales process and how that changes over time. So would love to understand, this is a very popular topic in transactional sales, or especially in shorter sales cycles, of how AI is beginning to even replace salespeople, or at least marketing automation becomes a big part of that. Personalization, a lot of that can be done with AI. What role do you think salespeople play? Or let me rephrase that. What aspects of the sales process will AI have its biggest impact of? And what role will salespeople play, especially as it comes to all the things that we've talked about, everything from empathy to personalization to caring for the customer and being their voice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, really where AI is going to inform the sales process, inform the go-to-market team's activity, is really going to be in analyzing the data around close one deals, successful one deals, and close lost deals. And a lot of this is already happening. I mean, a lot of this is already happening, in the space where, companies are looking at engagement of people, how long they go between opening emails, visiting the site, doing other types of, signal activity, right? And I think that, being able to look at not just one deal, the way that I've had to do it for most of my career is like, okay, well, let's look at what successful deals we sold, and literally going back and analyzing them to say, great, this is a cohort, this is what they look like, how do we draw those commonalities, and how do we then, write ourselves a playbook that, captures how this engagement went, to make sure that we're replicating that as a best practice. I think that that's really where, some of this AI has the benefit to do that, and to do it, across, hundreds of sales reps instead of, small groups of, 20 or 30 sales reps, to know when a deal is in danger because it's been in a stage for too long, and because there's been a change in the organization from a leadership standpoint. So, I think that you're always going to have the sales rep who has to understand, what do I need to do to get this deal back on track, or what, and actually know what that next step is. But having AI tools that can guide that person, that can remind that person, that can keep their focus and allow them to focus the portion of the pipeline that either is at risk or that is really, really likely to close and keep their attention, is where I see the most benefit of AI, at least in the short term, in the next 5 years.
What do you hope your job looks like 5 to 10 years from now?
Oh man. So that's a great question. I mean, I think the more time that you can spend with reps in the field on calls, and less that you're going to be spending, doing administrative stuff and building forecast, and kind of doing the admin work behind, sales leadership, I think the better off you are. Again, I think that about also the VP of sales as kind of a voice of the customer and kind of the conduit to the marketplace between, the internal teams that might be living in, ivory towers, and people that actually have to, go face to face with these customers on a day-to-day basis, and try to sell them something. And so I hope that, what these roles become with, additional tooling is, less babysitting and more actual, mentorship, more training, more, consulting the reps on how to actually interact in these scenarios, and less hey, you didn't follow up on that last call. That's the worst part of my job, is literally looking at, oh, it's been in this stage for so long, what's going on here, and than having to like manually go through a bunch of emails and like figure out, what's going on, then get on the phone with the rep and, have that conversation. When those notifications become, you know, just self-fulfilling, and it's just like, oh, you got a notification, like it becomes a lot easier to do that kind of micro task management. And because again, most managers don't want to do micromanagement, but it is a part of managing salespeople, is making sure that their fundamentals are tight, and that they're not getting sloppy as they get more and more successful.
Yeah, I love that. I hope that's a feature you can make your way towards. Derek, in our final few minutes here, I just want to ask you a couple of fire round questions. I'll ask them quick, and you can take as long or short as you want to answer them, all right?
Sure.
Let's do it. Any sales or startup books that have been particularly helpful to you?
Oh, I mean, that's I think that To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink is like one of my favorite, like, overall sales books. There's so much literature out there. Um, I'm like drawing a blank right now.
To Sell is Human is a strong answer.
Yeah, I mean, to sell a human is it's it's kind of like telling you to go read Zig Ziglar, or like it's very psychological sales oriented, which is, again, if you think about the conversation we've had about, like, you need to foster a culture of understanding and empathy for your customers, and putting yourself in their shoes. I think that, like, that's a great book that kind of captures that motif. The Startup Way is another good one. And I mean, God, there's just so many. The Purple Cow. I don't know if you've read that one.
By Seth Godin.
Yep. And he's real big on the personalization piece, and on kind of like, how when you're successful is that you're actually casting the die, and you are where your competition isn't, right? Like you've figured out how to differentiate yourself. And I just think that that's always something that I've really been attracted to from companies that I've wanted to work for standpoint, was like, this company's different, and here's why they're different, and here's why they answer the questions that customers are trying to solve in a better way, because they do think differently. And it is kind of, I'm very contrarian in that sense. Like, everyone's doing this, it's like, well, I'm gonna go the other way, and that's just my that's a little bit of my personality.
Yeah, Seth Godin is funny to me because he's got this thing where he publishes something online on his blog every single day. So
Yes.
7 days a week he's going to publish, which by virtue means he's got a lot of really good stuff out there, and also a bunch of rough in the diamonds, so to speak. So Purple Cow, I think, was one of his diamonds in the rough, but Seth Godin's blog you could probably live on for 2 years and not even begin to get through. Well, that was, I think, the longest answer ever to a short form question. But
Rapid fire. Okay. We'll get better to the next one.
But I love it. We got three fantastic book recommendations. What is the sale you are most proud of landing?
It's funny because, like, when I get this question, oftentimes people are like, well, it'd be Google, right? Like, you sold into Google, you brought LeadGenius into Google. And actually, it's funny, it's actually eBay. And which is so contrary, because when I thought about eBay in 2015, when they started to engage with this, I was like, eBay, it's like where my dad goes to sell like his car parts, for like, because he's a car collector. And it's just like the stigma that I had of kind of like this old marketplace that was like antiquated, where you go to sell cards and stuff. But it was actually because they had posted this RFP, and this RFP was like so broad and so over consuming, and it was just so wrong for what they were trying to actually accomplish as a business. We went in there and really reframed it for them, and helped them to actually get to like a go to market strategy and actually align the seller acquisition piece that they were trying to do to rebrand with, a data strategy that actually would allow them to do that. And actually, so I think that's probably my proudest moment as a salesperson, just because it was so far off of what they had actually published in RFP, and it was really an effort in convincing them that the way that we were going to present data was better.
I love that. I love that. What is a well-known company that you would have loved leading sales for in the early stage? And give me the pitch you would have used.
Oh man. I always look back on kind of the LinkedIn emergence, and I was like one of the really, really early adopters of this, as I was like living in Phoenix at the time, and I was introducing a bunch of people to it, and they were just like, this is stupid. Why the hell would I want Facebook for my business? Right? it was just like, and my pitch was like, well, you've got goals beyond this job, right? Like you've got ambitions beyond what you're doing today, right? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, just think about this as an evolving resume. Right. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but like that was one that, like, when I look back on my time in the Bay Area, like one of my few regrets is that I just didn't do it early enough. I didn't take the leap. I was 30 years old by the time I went out to the Bay Area, and I wanted to go out there since the time I was 12 years old, going to go see 49ers games with my aunt and uncle who lived in the area. So like, I think that LinkedIn example, kind of paints that, like, oh God, if I could have just taken that next step and just been a little more brave and been a little bit more bold at that stage of my life, my story might be a little bit different.
I love that. Well, Derek, I want to thank you very, very much. This was a ton of fun. Where can people learn more about your work, what you're doing, and are you hiring at all at LeadGenius?
Oh yeah, well, I'm definitely hiring at LeadGenius. Always looking for good enterprise consultants and reps that are really go to market focused, people that are marketing and sales minded, that are looking to just kind of fight the status quo and really build solutions for people and for customers, and get to work with the most exciting brands in the world. So if you want to get in touch with me, Derek Rahn on LinkedIn. At Derek Rahn at Twitter, and obviously you can always go to leadgenius.com and ask for a custom data set, and I can walk you through our methodology and how we approach the world of custom data and personalization in this age of automation and data saturation.
Beautiful. And for anyone listening without looking at their podcast app, that's Rahn, Rahn. So check him out. And Derek, thank you so much. This was a blast.
This was a blast, and really a pleasure meeting you, Adriel, and looking forward to kind of seeing the next podcast come out, and following you intensely moving forward. Looking forward to your future, man.
We won ourselves a fan. All right. Thank you. Well, there you have it. Derek Rahn, ladies and gentlemen. Sales leaders need to be operators. Sales leaders need to be the voice of the customer, and most importantly, sales leaders need to learn to say no. No to your customers and no to your colleagues. If you want to learn more about Derek and his work, find him on LinkedIn at Derek Rahn, or on Twitter at Derek Rahn. Rahn is spelled R-A-H-N. If you liked our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. Let us know what you think. If you didn't like the podcast, well, find me on Twitter or on Instagram at alubarski2, and we'll make it all better. Thanks, and happy selling.